Look closely at the most famous face of the 20th century. The architecture of it, the impossible symmetry, the jawline that could cut glass, the perfect, delicate slope of the nose. For over half a century, the world believed it was a miracle of nature. But how did Norma Jeane Doherty, a girl with a soft chin and a sweet, unremarkable face, simply vanish, leaving behind this flawless goddess? The answer has been hidden for decades, locked away in a filing cabinet, a secret kept between a surgeon and his ghost. Because the face of Marilyn Monroe was not born. It was built, and its construction began with a calculated, brutal act of demolition. Hollywood, in the late 1940s, was a dream factory, but it was also an assembly line. It didn't discover stars, it manufactured them. It took raw material, pretty girls from forgotten towns with starlight in their eyes, and hammered them into shape. They changed their names, their hair, their histories. They were given new voices, new walks, new personalities. But for some, the transformation had to go deeper. It had to go to the bone. Norma Jeane was one of those girls. She had the ambition, the spark, the incandescent vulnerability that the camera adored. But the studio heads, the gray men in smoke-filled rooms, saw flaws. They saw a face that was too soft, too round, too real. Her chin, they whispered, was weak. Her nose, a little too wide. Her jawline lacked the sharp definition required of a goddess. These were not observations. They were indictments. In the unforgiving geometry of the silver screen, her face was a problem that needed to be solved. And in Hollywood, problems like that weren't solved with makeup or clever lighting. They were solved with a scalpel. She was told, in no uncertain terms, that the face she was born with was not the face of a star. To become Marilyn, Norma Jeane had to be willing to be erased, piece by piece. She had to submit to the blueprint. She was just 24 years old. For decades, the story of her surgery remained a rumor, a ghost story told by bitter rivals, and dismissed by the studio as malicious gossip. The official narrative was sealed. Marilyn was a natural wonder. To suggest otherwise was blasphemy. But ghosts have a way of leaving evidence behind. And in 2013, the whispers finally took physical form. A set of medical files, long believed to be destroyed, surfaced from the shadows and went up for auction. The files contained a doctor's confidential notes and 6 grainy X-rays, dated from 1950 to 1962. The patient's name on the folder was an alias, Joan Newman. But the skull in the ghostly images, the bone structure beneath the skin, was unmistakably Marilyn's. The file belonged to a man named Drive, Michael Gurdon, a quiet, respected plastic surgeon with an office on Hollywood Boulevard. He was a man who knew the secret faces of the stars, a silent confessor to their vanities and insecurities. His notes were clinical, precise, and devastating. They documented a consultation in 1950, where he noted a chin deformity that required augmentation. The solution he proposed was radical, almost experimental for its time. A chin implant made of carved bovine cartilage, a piece of foreign bone, to be inserted into her jaw to create the chiseled, heart-shaped face the studio demanded. This wasn't a touch-up. It was an act of architectural fraud. The procedure would have been agonizing, the recovery slow. It meant swelling, bruising, and the constant, terrifying risk of rejection. But the physical pain was secondary to the psychological toll. They were telling her that the very foundation of her face, the bedrock of her identity, was flawed. To succeed, she had to become someone else, literally from the bone outward. This was the first and most profound betrayal. The world would fall in love with a mask, and she would be the one trapped behind it forever. But she wasn't alone in that sterile office. Pulling the strings, signing the checks, was a small, powerful man with an obsession, Johnny Hyde, her agent, her mentor, her lover. A man 40 years her senior, a titan at the William Morris Agency, who saw in Norma Jeane the raw material for the greatest star the world had ever known. He loved her, perhaps, but he loved the idea of her more. He saw her as his ultimate creation, and he was willing to pay any price to perfect her. The surgery was his idea, his investment. He was the architect. Dr. Gurdon was the contractor. Norma Jeane's face was merely the construction site. Hyde pushed her, molded her, and ultimately sold her on the necessity of the blade. He convinced her that this was the only path to the immortality she craved. It was a devil's bargain, made under the hum of fluorescent lights. She would get her perfect face, her stardom, her name in lights. In exchange, she would give up Norma Jeane. The lie was complete. The surgeon's notes from 1950 confirmed the chin implant, the secret that built the foundation of her iconic look. But buried in the clinical shorthand was another entry, a reference to a nasal tip cartilage graft, a second procedure, more subtle, designed to refine the end of her nose, giving it that perfect, upturned finish. This too was Hyde's vision. But the records from Dr. Gourdin were not the only ghost to emerge from the past. The chin and nose created the famous profile. But the true magic of Marilyn, the hypnotic quality of her on-screen presence, was in her smile. And for that, they needed a different kind of artist. The second lie was hidden in her teeth. A separate set of records, from a dental surgeon named Walter Taylor, reveals another layer of the conspiracy. Her teeth, which had a slight, charming overbite in her early modeling photos, a signature of the Norma Jeane look, were deemed imperfect. They were reshaped, capped, and straightened into a flawless, luminous wall of white. Dr. Taylor's work went beyond simple dentistry. It was about altering the entire structure of her bite. This corrected the so-called weakness in her jaw from another angle, ensuring that from any direction, the camera saw only strength and perfect lines. Every smile was now a performance, a carefully calibrated display of manufactured perfection. Think of the psychological weight of this. Every time she spoke, every time she laughed, every time she formed that famous, breathy whisper, she was using an instrument that had been fundamentally rebuilt by a team of men. The voice that seduced a nation was shaped, in part, by the new architecture in her mouth. The breath catching on reshaped enamels, the sound resonating in a slightly altered chamber. It was another layer of artifice, another wall between the woman and the world. She was becoming a symphony of other people's ideas, a living, breathing testament to the studio's power to create and to destroy. Her entire being was a collaboration, and she was the least consulted partner. But the story, hidden in the medical files, doesn't end in the 1950s. The most haunting secrets are found in the later entries. One X-ray, dated 1958, 8 years after the initial surgeries, tells a new and disturbing story. It clearly shows a small, hairline fracture in one of her nasal bones, a fresh injury. The official studio story, spun to a prying press, was that she had suffered a simple fall on set. It was a clumsy accident. Nothing more. But the timing is suspicious, coming during one of the most turbulent periods of her life. Her marriage to Arthur Miller crumbling, her reliance on pills and alcohol deepening. The fracture was real, but the story was another lie. The surgeon's notes from that visit are brief, almost coded, but they hint at a deeper trauma, a secret she carried that was far more damaging than a simple fall. This later visit reveals the terrible truth of her bargain. The face was not a one-time fix. It was a lifelong sentence. It required constant maintenance, secret visits to Dr. Gourdin to monitor the implants, to manage the slow, inevitable creep of time. The face that had made her a prisoner of fame was also a prison of flesh and bone. She was trapped in a paradox. She had to project an image of effortless, natural beauty, while secretly terrified of the delicate, artificial scaffolding beneath her skin. The fear of discovery must have been a constant, low-grade hum in the back of her mind. What if the implant shifted? What if a journalist got too close? What if the world found out that their goddess was a ghost, built on a foundation of lies and bovine bone? The studio, of course, was her co-conspirator. They were the gatekeepers of the lie. Their publicity machine worked overtime, planting stories about her rigorous exercise and unique diet. They crafted a mythology of natural perfection that was as meticulously constructed as her face. Any whispers of surgery were ruthlessly stamped out. It was a conspiracy of silence, orchestrated by studio chiefs and press agents, and at its center was a woman who was forced to deny her own history, to disown the face of the girl she used to be. She was the star witness in a case for her own authenticity, forced to lie on the stand every single day. The world saw the glamour. They didn't see the girl waking up in the middle of the night, pressing a finger to her chin, just to make sure the secret was still in place. But the 1958 visit to Dr. Gourdin was about more than a broken nose. His notes from that day contain a chilling medical observation. He refers to a cartilage dissolution, a slow, gradual decay of the chin implant itself. The bovine cartilage, a foreign object, was being broken down by her own body. The very foundation of her famous face, the cornerstone of the Marilyn Monroe persona, was beginning to crumble from within. The lie was literally falling apart. This revelation reframes everything about her final years. The erratic behavior, the legendary insecurities, the crippling stage fright. They were not just the symptoms of a troubled mind. They were the terror of a woman whose identity was physically disintegrating. The bovine cartilage used in that era was notoriously unstable. It was prone to absorption, to shrinking, to becoming soft and unpredictable over time. She wasn't just fighting her psychological demons. She was in a battle with her own biology, which was actively trying to reject the central pillar of her manufactured beauty. Imagine the horror, the feeling of the implant softening, the sharp line of her jaw beginning to blur. Every mirror would become an enemy. Every photograph a potential exposé. The fear would have been all-consuming. The fear that one day, she would wake up, and Norma Jeane would be staring back at her. The ghost she had tried to bury 30 years prior was now clawing its way back, from the inside out. Her body was betraying the lie, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The ticking clock wasn't just her career or her youth. It was the physical half-life of the secret she kept in her face. The set of records and x-rays that revealed all of this sold at auction for $25,600. The world finally had proof of the chin, the nose, the fundamental deception that launched a legend. The story, it seemed, was finally complete. But the person who sold the files remained anonymous. A shadow figure releasing a ghost from a locked room. And the files themselves were not complete. The auction house admitted that the full private records of Dr. Michael Gurdon, the detailed notes describing every secret visit, every late-night phone call, every desperate plea from the world's most famous woman, were not included in the sale. There was a page missing, a critical entry, according to a source close to the doctor's estate. A page that detailed a final, frantic consultation in the summer of 1962, just weeks before she died. On it, the surgeon had noted a request for a new, dangerous, and desperate procedure, a final attempt to stop the foundation from collapsing entirely. What was this procedure? What final, desperate act was so damning it had to be physically ripped from the historical record? The speculation is chilling. In the early 1960s, cosmetic surgery was a wild frontier. New, experimental, and often reckless techniques were being tested on the desperate and the wealthy. The most likely candidate was a radical new type of facial filler, a synthetic polymer, a primitive form of liquid silicone, injected directly into the tissue around the failing implant to shore it up, to literally pack the crumbling foundation with a permanent, pliable cement. It was a one-way street. Unlike the cartilage implant, which the body could break down, this new material would be there forever. It was also notoriously dangerous, prone to migrating, causing disfigurement, chronic inflammation, and a host of terrifying autoimmune responses. Was this her final gamble? To trade a dissolving secret for a permanent, potentially lethal one? To poison herself in a last-ditch effort to remain beautiful? To keep the ghost of Norma Jeane at bay just a little longer? The missing page suggests her desperation had pushed her beyond all rational fear. The absence of this page asks an even darker question. Who took it? And why? This was not a random act of vandalism. This was a precise, deliberate excision of a single, critical fact. Was it drive? Gurdon himself, trying to cover his tracks, to erase his involvement in a procedure that could have ruined his reputation? Or did the order come from higher up? By 1962, Marilyn was no longer just a movie star. She was a political liability, entangled with the most powerful men in the world, including the President of the United States. A disfigured Marilyn, a Marilyn scarred by a botched, secret surgery, would be a public relations disaster not just for a Hollywood studio, but potentially for the White House. The page may have been removed, not to protect Marilyn's legacy, but to protect the powerful men who were in her orbit. It was another layer of the cover-up, hiding a medical crisis inside a political one. The crumbling of her face was a threat to more than just her career. It was a threat to the carefully constructed image of American power and glamour. This physical decay provides a devastating new context for her psychological state. Her lifelong struggle with her own identity was now playing out in a terrifyingly literal way. The face she saw in the mirror was no longer a reliable ally. It was a traitor. We know from her psychiatrist's notes that she suffered from what he called an intense fear of abandonment. Now, her own body was abandoning her. The foundation of her entire persona, the one thing that separated the globally adored Marilyn from the unwanted Norma Jeane, was liquefying beneath her skin. Her escalating use of barbiturates, sleeping pills, and champagne wasn't just about insomnia or stage fright. It was a desperate attempt to silence the primal terror of her own disintegration. Imagine the feeling, a dull ache in her jaw, a new softness where a sharp line used to be. Every morning would bring a new wave of panic. Every touch, a confirmation of her worst fear. The world was demanding she be a goddess, while her own biology was pulling her back down to earth, reminding her that she was just mortal flesh and bone. And the very thing she had done to escape her old self was now the mechanism that was dragging her back. But the trail doesn't end with a missing page. There is another clue, hidden in plain sight. In Marilyn's personal effects, sold at auction decades after her death, was a small, leather-bound address book. Tucked inside a flap was a small, folded piece of paper. On it, a single name and a phone number, written in her own distinct, looping handwriting. Drive, Franklin Pennington. There was no drive. Franklin Pennington listed as a plastic surgeon in Los Angeles or New York. He wasn't a celebrity doctor. In fact, he barely existed in public records at all. He was a ghost. But investigative journalists, digging through declassified medical archives, found him. Dr. Franklin Pennington was not a cosmetic surgeon. He was a research chemist, a pioneer in experimental biomaterials, working on contract for the Department of Defense. What was his specialty? Creating stable, flesh-like polymers for use in battlefield reconstructive surgery. He was designing materials to rebuild the faces of soldiers, materials that would be permanent, undetectable, and could withstand the most extreme conditions. He was a man who operated in the shadows, at the absolute cutting edge of medical science, creating things that were not yet approved, not yet legal, for civilian use. Why was his name in Marilyn Monroe's private address book? The connection is terrifying. Was Dr. Gurdin in over his head? Was the desperate procedure noted on the missing page a referral to Pennington? Was Marilyn, in her final weeks, contemplating having a military-grade experimental substance injected into her face by a man who didn't officially exist? This wasn't just about vanity anymore. This was a descent into a world of clandestine science and off-the-books medicine, a world where the lines between healing and human experimentation were terrifyingly blurred. This potential connection to Pennington forces us to re-examine her final film, the unfinished Something's Got to Give. Her behavior on that set has become the stuff of legend. Her chronic lateness, her inability to remember lines, her firing and subsequent rehiring. The studio painted her as an unprofessional, drug-addled diva. But look again. Look at the footage. She looks radiant, yes, but there's a frantic, almost manic energy in her eyes. She is performing beauty with the desperation of someone who knows it is about to be taken away. She wasn't just being difficult. She was terrified. She was stalling. She was likely in physical discomfort from the failing implant, and was psychologically paralyzed by the decision she was facing: to let her famous face collapse, or to submit to a frightening, experimental procedure from which there would be no return. Every day she showed up late was another day she didn't have to make that choice. Every flubbed line was a subconscious plea for more time. She was trapped between the studio, which demanded she be perfect, and her own body, which was making perfection impossible. This wasn't a star having a breakdown. This was a woman in an impossible situation, trying to hold the pieces of her life, and her face, together. The final puzzle piece is perhaps the most tragic of all. It comes from the coroner's report. Buried deep in the toxicological analysis, beyond the headlines of acute barbiturate poisoning, is a small, overlooked detail. The medical examiner noted a slight but measurable level of tissue inflammation around the mandible, the jawline. It was dismissed at the time as insignificant, but we now know what it was. It was the physical evidence of her body's war against itself. The proof that the cartilage implant was, as Dr. Gurdin's note suggested, actively dissolving. In her final moments, the very lie that had created her was physically falling apart. The ghost of Norma Jeane wasn't just coming back. She had broken through. The tragedy of Marilyn Monroe is not that she died young. It's that she died fighting a secret war on two fronts: against a world that demanded impossible perfection, and against her own body, which was trying to tell the truth. But the story of the face doesn't end with her death. In fact, her death is what cemented the lie in place forever. With no new photographs, no aging, no slow decline, the face of 1962 became permanent. The dissolution of the implant was frozen in time. The dangerous procedure was never performed. Her death, ironically, preserved the illusion her life was dedicated to maintaining. The mask became the reality. But the surgeons who built her, Drive, Johnny Hyde's man, and Dr. Michael Gurdin, where did they go? They faded back into the quiet, wealthy anonymity of Beverly Hills. They never spoke of their most famous creation. They took the secrets of her face, the true extent of the work, the late-night calls, the desperate consultations to their graves. Their silence was the final lock on the vault. For decades, the story was sealed. It was just a rumor, a whisper. The idea that this icon of natural beauty was a surgical creation was dismissed as a conspiracy theory. The truth only began to emerge thanks to a strange twist of fate. It wasn't a journalist or a historian who broke the case. It was the voracious, often morbid, world of celebrity memorabilia auctions. The hunger to own a piece of the legend, a dress, a script, a tube of lipstick, became a multi-million-dollar industry. And in that industry, everything has a price, even a person's medical history. The auction of Gurdin's files was a watershed moment. But it wasn't the only leak. Other, smaller artifacts have surfaced over the years, each adding a new, disturbing brushstroke to the portrait. A prescription bottle, sold for $3,000, not for the pills inside, but for the prescribing doctor's name, which led reporters to a little-known dermatologist who specialized in electrolysis, revealing the painful process she endured to change her hairline. A dental mold, which showed evidence of extensive cosmetic bonding and reshaping to perfect her smile. Each piece was a breadcrumb, leading back to the same inescapable conclusion. Nothing about her was left to chance. She wasn't born a goddess. She was assembled, piece by piece, with agonizing precision, like a beautiful, tragic Frankenstein's monster, built for the camera's gaze. And like that monster, she was ultimately destroyed by the very thing that gave her life. Her fame, her face. But the Frankenstein comparison might be more chillingly accurate than we ever imagined. Because the most disturbing secret wasn't that she had a chin implant, it was the implant itself. Where did this crucial piece of cartilage come from? Gurdin's notes are cryptic, but one term, buried in a list of surgical supplies, offers a terrifying clue. Bovine xenograft was the most famous jawline in Hollywood, built, in part, from an animal? Was Marilyn Monroe unknowingly a test subject for a radical procedure far beyond cosmetic enhancement? The evidence is terrifyingly clear. But the decision wasn't just medical. It was financial. A high-risk investment in a human asset. The signature authorizing the purchase wasn't Gurdin's. It belonged to the man who saw her not as a person, but as his greatest creation and most valuable property. Her agent, Johnny Hyde. Hyde wasn't just shaping her career. He was literally building his star from the ground up, using untested, dangerous materials. Why take such a risk? Because for Hyde, Norma Jeane was a flawed prototype. Marilyn Monroe was the product, and he would stop at nothing to perfect her, even if it meant turning her into a medical guinea pig. This reframes everything. The story is no longer about a woman seeking beauty. It's about a man playing God, with a desperate young actress as his clay. And his influence didn't end with her chin. Hyde's control was absolute. He dictated her diet, her walk, her voice. He oversaw the platinum bleaching that burned her scalp, and the elocution lessons that erased her natural cadence. The Marilyn Monroe we know wasn't a person. She was a project, meticulously designed and executed by a man who stood to gain everything from her success. Her body became his canvas, her identity his intellectual property. The bovine xenograft wasn't just a surgical choice. It was a metaphor for the entire enterprise. They took something organic, something human, and grafted an artificial, commercially viable product onto it. And just like the implant, the persona of Marilyn was a foreign body. It was an unnatural creation that Norma Jeane's soul was constantly trying to reject. The anxiety, the depression, the insomnia. This wasn't the price of fame. This was the immune response of a spirit fighting an invasion. Her tragedy is a warning that echoes louder today than ever before. We live in a world of digital masks, of curated lives, and algorithmic perfection. We filter, we edit, we augment. We are all, in our own way, performing our own surgeries, creating our own illusions for the approval of a faceless crowd. Marilyn wasn't the exception. She was the blueprint. She walked this path first, a ghost from the future, showing us the devastating human cost of becoming a perfect, hollow image. In the end, we must ask ourselves who we are truly mourning. Are we mourning the beautiful star, the icon whose image is frozen in time? Or are we mourning the lost girl, Norma Jeane Mortensen, the one who was told, from her first day in Hollywood, that everything about her was wrong, the one who was sacrificed on the altar of celebrity, her very bones replaced to build a fantasy for the rest of us? The real Marilyn Monroe was not the woman on the screen. She was the battlefield where Norma Jeane fought and lost her final war. The boulevards of Hollywood are paved with forgotten stories and manufactured truths. We exist to find the people buried beneath the legends. To unearth more of the real story, subscribe to Boulevard_of_Monroe.